Hi, guys.
Hello. You look
Hello.
closer now than you did.
So this is our soft start. We'll do a hard start in about 5 minutes, but in case you're joining us, this is a strange and uncanny Halloween with David Surface, Ina EFFRESS, Julia Rust, and myself, Daniel Braum. And we're just going to hang out for a couple of minutes. Everyone get comfortable, take a chair, and in about 5 minutes, we'll roll our fancy opening credits and get the show started.
They're a little fancy.
We have a comment from someone. David and Julia, this is James.
Oh, James. James, how are you, buddy? James is my Halloween friend from way back.
From Halloween Town.
He is
Hi,
my
James.
big Halloween pal. He has sent, and I'm assuming this is the right James, he has, among other things, sent little block print like Halloween images on postcards that he made for
I'm going to step away from the camera for 1 second.
long time, and they're beautiful. I don't have one here. They're out there. They're downstairs.
We have another someone who's saying hello. I don't know who this is. Mythic Delirium. Hi. They say howdy, y'all.
Hi, Mythic Delirium. Welcome.
Howdy.
Oh. It's Mike Allen. Matt's
hi, Mike.
telling us. Hi, Mike.
Happy Halloween.
Oh, it's James Henry. Yep. Hi, James.
Are you seeing these comments? Because I'm not seeing them.
Click the word comments.
Okay,
Not private chat. You see it?
Oh, there we go. Then I can come in like that. Very good. Oh man, James. By the way, if you're listening, the image that he chose for this year is a monk who manifested as a demon way back in the day in order to scare away a plague, and we thought that was very appropriate.
Yeah.
We appreciate that. We have one upstairs and one downstairs now.
Art imitating life this year.
Yeah.
We were talking about Neil Gaiman earlier. Has anyone read the Sandman comics? Anyone?
I started them a long time ago. I love the artwork, so I was interested, and I love Neil Gaiman, but I never got very far. But I know they've got a big fan base. Are you a fan?
Yeah, I like.
Oh, Amanda. Hi, Amanda. Glad to see you here. Amanda was one of my students in a writing workshop, and very good writer herself.
Yeah, we were talking about stories we couldn't remember. It just made me think. I think in one of Neil Gaiman's Sandman branches, I think there's a library. It's not of lost stories, but it's maybe of lost stories that were never written, but were just dreamed about or something. So it's like a whole like a mystic library in like this dream world of stories that people thought of but never got out. And
ooh, that's a great concept.
Yeah. It's one of the things I like about that comic series. It was just full of such abstract and wonderful ideas that he somehow managed to bring to life there. So
okay, now I'm going to read it. Hi, Pete. That's my son.
Pete says, love the matching backgrounds, Mom and David.
It's almost as if you're in the same house.
I'm actually sitting 6 inches away from her. Let me see.
Ow, stop it.
Oh.
We're in different rooms entirely.
Do you guys ever see, is it some of those like makeover, I don't know how I watch them, either of those, it's like makeup shots where like they feel coordinated and like sort of push, they all do it on Zoom, but it screens like that where they push it over, there's like an interaction and it plays over. But they're not sitting six inches away from each other, they make it work.
Yeah, I want it.
Like movies, period. No film, the changing shots is not necessarily the same house. They open a door and they walk through the door, and it's like maybe 3 days later or 3 days before when they shot the film in the room, and the room is in a different set. It's just amazing.
Yeah, I want
Cinematic. Mary Hall, Ghosts on the Bookshelf. Yes, you see them.
Bookshelf, right there. She's what? No. Mirror image. Yeah, these little guys. These little guys have been haunting bookshelves since 1956. So
Wow.
Let's see
they
mine
got a lot of ghost dust on them.
behind my head. Gross.
Yeah. So in about a minute, it's just about 5 after. We're when the clock strikes 5 after 8, we'll have Matt roll the start, and we'll get started. Oh yeah, it's 5 after 8. Why don't you roll the opening, Matt? Okay, welcome to a strange and uncanny Halloween. This is a celebration of the October Halloween season with EFFRESS, David Surface, Julia Rust, and me, Daniel Braum. We're going to hang out, talk about horror and Halloween, and read from some of our work. So we're all co-hosting this together. I'm going to turn it over to David Surface, who's going to introduce me because I'm going to be the first reader.
Thanks, Daniel. Welcome, everybody. Yeah, it's a pleasure to introduce Daniel. Just briefly, everybody likes to talk about the horror community, and it's true. It's a wonderful community, but it doesn't happen by itself. It happens with effort and initiative, and Daniel's just terrific as far as that goes. He's a master at bringing people together and making them feel good. Case in point right here. So thank you for that, sir. And here comes the introduction. Daniel Braume is the author of the short story collections The Night Marchers and Other Strange Tales from Cemetery Dance eBooks, The Wish Mechanics, Stories of Strange and Fantastic from Independent Legions, and the chapbook Yeti, Tiger, Dragon, Dim Shores. Underworld Dreams, his third collection, was released from Leith Press in October of 2020, and The Serpent's Shadow, his first novella, was released from Cemetery Dance Books in July 2019. Daniel is the editor of the Spirits Unwrapped anthology from Leith Press, and his work has appeared in publications ranging from Lady Churchill's Rosebud Wristlet, nice, to Shivers 8 anthology. And his most recent story appears in Best Horror of the Year, Volume 12, edited by Ellen Datlow. He is the host of Nighttime Logic Reading Series and the annual New York Ghost Story Festival, which launches in December of 2020. Please welcome Daniel Braume.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah, just adding to that introduction there, David, Ina, and Julia and I all met. We were all contributors to this wonderful book, Nightscript III, edited by C.M. Muller, and the four of us appeared at the Lovecraft Bar at a edition a few years back of one of the Nighttime Logic events, and it was so great. And we've been meaning to get together and do something ever since. And finally, we've made this happen. So it's so great to be back with these great people and fantastic authors. So tonight I'm going to read a Halloween or Day of the Dead set story. It's from my second collection called The Wish Mechanics, Tales of the Strange and Fantastic. And I'm just going to read a bit of it. We're kind of going to stop off right when it starts to get ghostly. But it's also a public service announcement because it is called A Man's Guide to Costumes and the Most Common Ways to Get Arrested. And we'll be visiting two of those common ways to get arrested. And this was co-written with a friend of mine, Jason Cilio. 1. hotel room parties in Las Vegas. The room full of grown-ups in costumes were carrying on like children, just like Ed had expected the day after Halloween to be like here. His brother was the worst offender. "I know why you're here," a woman Ed didn't know said to him. "You're here to take off your costume." He didn't know anyone in this godforsaken room party, except for Oscar. That was the point. To break out of the post-prison blues, his brother had said, but they both knew there was more to it than that. "I'm not wearing a costume," Ed said. He wore what he always wore since getting out: black faded jeans, motorcycle boots. Different shirt, though. Thin cotton and short sleeves for the Las Vegas heat. The woman looked at him as if she didn't believe him, and as if he was indeed wearing some outlandish rubber mask and costume. Her face was painted to look like a sugar skull. Her black shirt with bones on it exposed the bottom of her concave belly. A tattoo of a scythe marked her upper thigh, skirt much too short, ink much too sharp, much too bright, either new or fake. "Like my costume?" Oscar tapped the silver milk bowl he wore around his neck on a chain. "I'm Milk. Here, kitty kitty." He looked ridiculous in his white t-shirt and white sweatpants. But he was right. There were at least 4 women dressed as black cats, all of them looking fine. The woman standing next to Miss Sugarskull looking particularly fine in all tight black clothes, hugging her slender body. She smiled at Oscar as she swayed and mouthed song lyrics of the bass-heavy tune, cranking from the little speaker on the desk with the hard liquor. The out-of-date hotel suite was packed with guests holding red plastic cups. Over-tipping the flamingo's monkey-suited bellhop made Oscar feel like a big man. Ed didn't blame him for wanting to take him to a party now that he was out. Ed recognized the bellhop's jailhouse ink and knew he would have told them where the parties were anyway. The 2 men had seen something in each other. Was it the telltale costume of an ex-con, the cloud that follows those who have known hardship? Or just a recognition that they were different than all the soft people surrounding them? "Why are you here?" Ed asked Miss Sugarskull. "I'm here for you, Eduardo," she said. He hadn't heard a woman speak his name since Francisca. Before he could ask the woman what she meant, her cat-suited friend screeched and grabbed Oscar. "Ooh, leche con sucar! Bailar conmigo!" Catwoman said. "What?" Oscar asked with a big goofy smile. What's she saying? What's she saying, Ed?" "Dance with me. Dance with me," Catwoman said. "I'm here with her, but I'm not here for your brother." When she smiled, one cheek rose higher than the other, and she wore too much makeup. Her eyes sparkled against the fluorescent pink glare coming through the window from the casino across the street. Ed knew she was the kind of girl that was dangerous. Dangerous for Oscar. She'd break his heart, and Oscar might be stupid enough to let her. "Let's do this. You here to dance?" Oscar asked. "I'm here to party," Catwoman said. "My brother Ed's here to party. Ed, come on, be friendly. Dance with us." "I don't dance," Ed said. "Don't worry, he's not a psycho ex-con, despite his clever disguise," Oscar said. "He's a teddy bear." Catwoman took Oscar by the hand and led him into the crowd of sexy nurses, catsuits, zombies, and male stripper wannabes. Miss Sugarskull reached for Ed's hand. "I mean it. I don't dance," Ed said. "I'm just the Milk's older brother." The woman leaned in and whispered, "I know who you are." Black t-shirt with the skeleton on it clung to her body, raised glitter outlining the bones, white makeup covered her face, little red roses surrounded her blackened eyes, a simple spiderweb adorned her forehead, and neat stitches extended her mouth to her cheeks. Her breath felt cool on his face. A hint of something earthy and sweet lingered beneath the burnt chemical scent of face makeup. You really know who I am? So tell, who am I? Across the room, Oscar and Catwoman danced in the costumed crowd. His hands traced the jaguar spot tattoos on her shoulder. The room smelled like decades of smoke and alcohol-laced sweat. You are a man who doesn't want to be here, Miss Sugarskull said. Your brother convinced you to come, to party, so you did. But you're here for something else. Your brother promised you'd be back in time to check in with your parole officer in the morning, so you listened. Ed's instinct screamed danger, but he knew she wasn't a cop. Cops didn't smell like a church during a funeral. So what is it I'm here for? I'll show you. I'm getting my sister and your brother, and I'll show you. Before Ed could question her, a blonde woman with framed glasses dressed as a cop pushed through the door. She confidently walked on two tall, spiked heels. Silver handcuffs hung off the belt circling her black leather pants. Ed noticed the ring on her finger sparkling even in the dim light, and a hint of white powder under her nose. Hey there! If I don't get a beer soon, I'm going to have to arrest someone, cop woman said. In the bathroom, Ed said. The sexy cop stepped closer, too close. He could feel the heat of her body. Help a lady out, she said. How about you get me one? And I think about not giving you a ticket. Ed moved away from her and hurried into the bathroom. She had been close enough to touch. The smell of her breath, her warmth, all intoxicating. For a heartbeat, he had forgotten Francisca. Vegas was proving dangerous. Parties, one of the most common ways to get arrested. Trouble, capital T. Ed reached into the bathtub to grab a bottle, grateful for the chill of the icy water. The door shut behind him. The sexy cop leaned against it, unbuttoning her shirt. Nice ring, Ed said. Open the door. I don't want any trouble. It's Halloween in Vegas. She unbuttoned the last button, revealing a pink bra with a small bag of cocaine tucked inside. Halloween was yesterday, but points for partying hard. Just open the door. I don't mess around with other people's old ladies. Her confused expression changed to resignation. Fine, but you're not leaving without at least doing a line with me. The door bust open. A short, stocky guy with muscles stretching his khaki shorts and polo shirt barreled in, looking like he was having a heart attack. What the fuck, Kyra? He said. Easy, man, Ed said. I'm just grabbing a beer. Get the fuck away from my wife. He rushed past his bra-clad wife and pushed Ed. Ed staggered and fell onto the toilet. He tried to stand, but the guy was on him. Strong hands closed around Ed's neck and squeezed. Ed punched the guy's back. He planted his feet and tried to push up. Everything was blurring and getting dark. He reached for something. Anything. His left hand plunged into the ice-filled bathtub. His fingers closed around a bottle and he swung it up. The crash was unreal, like a sound effect, but the hiss and smell of hops and foam was as real as could be. The guy staggered back with his hands over his face. Blood poured from between his fingers. Onlookers from the party pulled the wailing man out of the bathroom. A jagged shard of a broken bottle stuck out of his right cheek. Miss Sugarskull rushed in, Oscar and Catwoman right behind her. Do something, Catwoman said. No, Miss Sugarskull said. Everyone sees. It's going to ruin the party. What? Oscar said. What is she going to do? Are you okay? We're not here to party, Miss Sugarskull said to her sister. Let's go. Ed rubbed his neck. Cell phones were out, dialing and snapping photos. She's right, Ed said. We got to get out of here. She was right. No way he was going back in over Oscar's plan to break him out of the same old, same old. It took everything he had to keep his head down and nose clean. He followed his brother and the girls out of the party and down the long, winding hall to the elevator. After what seemed like an eternal wait, the car came, and they entered. Miss Sugarskull pushed the G button. "This is bad, Ed. Your PO's gonna flip," Oscar said. "It's gonna be all right," Catwoman said. "Don't kill the buzz. We're just moving the party." The elevator stopped at the ground level, and they exited to the concrete parking garage beneath the casino. Ed sat behind the wheel. "No," Miss Sugarskull said. "You're too drunk." "Right," Ed said. He switched seats with Oscar. "Where to?" Oscar asked. "Just get out of here," Ed said. "Then home." Oscar put the car in reverse, spun the wheels, and cruised out the exit, taking them away from the casino and the shitstorm up in the suite. 2. Traffic stops. Oscar turned onto Las Vegas Boulevard. "Where the fuck we going?" he asked. "Home," Ed said. "Take it west. I need to be home." "No, east," Miss Sugarskull said. Oscar gripped the wheel and spun the car around. "Why the fuck you do that?" Ed said. "Try not to attract attention." "I don't know," Oscar said. "Turn it back." "I can't." "Aw, you're gonna ruin the party, aren't you?" Catwoman said to her sister. "His ex-wife said to head east," Miss Sugarskull replied. "I ain't ruining my party for this guy's ex-wife." "Are they talking about my wife?" Ed asked Oscar. He pictured her, still and lifeless, laying on the rest stop concrete, her dark hair a bloody tangle surrounding her bruised face. "I don't know," Oscar said. "I'll get you home, Ed." "Yeah, we need to go west. I have to get back to LA before my PO realizes I left the state." "Everyone, just relax," Miss Sugarskull said. "You can't go home yet." He did want home more than anything, but nowhere felt like home anymore. "At least slow down," Ed said. "Speeding's one of the most common ways for a guy like me to get arrested." Red and blue lights flashed in the rearview mirror. "Fuck! Speak of the devil," Ed said. Oscar pulled the car onto the right shoulder and put it in park. "Be cool," Ed said. The cruiser pulled behind them. A cop exited and strutted over. "You know why I pulled you over?" "Speeding?" Oscar answered. "Affirmative, amigo." Ed hated the cop's condescending tone. "License and registration." Oscar retrieved the documents from the glove box and handed them over. "Do something," Catwoman said to her sister. "This is ruining the party." "Officer," Miss Sugarskull said. "Wait." The cop turned to her and put his hand on his holster. When they made eye contact, he froze. Something passed between them. Ed thought of the black and white swirl at the beginning of Twilight Zone episodes he and Francisca loved to watch on New Year's Day, but there was nothing, just the woman's soft amber pupils reflecting the light of the waning moon. The cop returned the documents. "Look, you better slow down," he stammered. "Be careful where you pull out. You all have a good evening." He entered his cruiser and drove off. Oscar merged back into traffic. "What the fuck was that?" "You won't understand," Miss Sugarskull said. "Just thank us you didn't get busted." I can't even," Ed said. "You gotta tell me what the fuck that just was." "Doesn't matter. Some things just don't matter, okay?" "No, not okay, but pull over. I gotta take a piss. That sure as hell matters." "Wait till we hit the open road," Miss Sugarskull said. Ed didn't have to go. He was thinking of making a run for it. Something was going on here. something that spelled trouble. Las Vegas's lights gave way to the starkness of the desert highway. Miss Sugarskull nodded her permission, and Oscar pulled over. Ed opened the door and slammed it behind him. Cacti taller than Ed lined both sides of the road. The day's heat still radiated off the ground. He walked between the cacti, careful not to snag himself, stopped in a clearing, and unzipped his pants. A tiny pair of eyes stared at him from the cactus arm before him. A black lizard with an orange and yellow pattern on its back basked on the cactus, watching him. Ed turned away and relieved himself. A sting jabbed the back of his arm. He turned to see the lizard scuttling away on the sand. It stopped, turned its head, flicked its tongue at him, and then continued fleeing. He checked his arm. There were 2 neat red dots. Fuck me, Ed said. He zipped his pants and made his way back to the car. He opened the passenger door and buckled his seatbelt. You're not going to let us go west, are you? Ed asked. No, Miss Sugarskull said, but there's a motel a few miles up. We can stop there. Yes, party, Catwoman said. My milk still warm? Oscar scrunched his face and shrugged. Then he said, hell yeah. Ed's arm hurt bad, but he made no mention of the bite or the dizziness he was feeling. Fucking lizard, he thought. I've shaken off worse than this. On the side of the road, he saw people walking between the tall cacti, but said nothing about them either. Part 3. Motel rooms in Las Vegas. But we're going to cut it there, and we're going to turn it over to David Surface.
All right. Thanks, Dan. That's amazing. You know, you kind of, that story really like captures what I think of as like the kind of edge of danger that's in a lot of adult celebrations of Halloween, like when the kind of the partying mentality of the young adult and Halloween come together. It's like, you know, sometimes it just gets scary. So I like that. I like that very much. I have to say, I was reading this book today. This book of Dan's here. And there's a Halloween story in here.
Absolutely,
do you mind if
yeah.
I ask you about this one?
It's another. I think you're talking about a girl's. Girls. It's got a long title too. Yes. A Girl's Guide to Superior Cat Makeup and Avoiding Commonly Found Suburban Demons, which the story that I just read from is sort of a successor in a way, at least. In that they both have abnormally long titles, and they're both set in Halloween.
Both on Halloween. It's very good. Yeah. Well, this is a kid story. But this is the first. I just realized I was reading this today. This was the first Daniel Brauum story I ever read, and it was online somewhere, and I had no idea who. And I read it, and it just knocked me out. And the last paragraph in particular, I'm going to read it. It takes 12 seconds. So I'm just. The last paragraph. This is a kid who's been exposed to some strangeness on Halloween, and at the end, some bullying and weird adult weirdness. And at the end, he says, "I'll wear a costume every day, not just for Halloween. Cat or grown-up who scares devil-horned men away. I'll dress up and pretend, or just pretend. I'll keep pretending until I am who I'm pretending to be, who I want to be, what I want to be, and I'm never going to stop." And I read that. It was like I want to stand up and stand up and cheer. It's a manifesto, and it seems to me that what you captured there is about Halloween. Like one of the real horrors that we encounter about Halloween as we're growing up is having to give it up. You sort of have this choice between giving it up and being very sad, or not giving it up and being sort of tagged as a freak, some kind of freak or something like that. And I identified with that, and I thought that there was something in there that was almost bigger than Halloween about your imagination and your right to exercise your imagination or your creativity. Can you talk about that a little bit? I mean, do you feel like that's part of Halloween for you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for picking up on that. I know Halloween is the season for us horror writers, but one of the things the four of us have in common is, our work. Maybe we're in the horror category because maybe it's the only club that'll have us. Maybe we don't really quite. And I don't mean that in a weird way. I mean that in a way like when you write your own, write from the heart, or you write your stuff. Maybe there isn't just quite a neat fit for it. And so like when I decided to write about Halloween, I wasn't going to write about ghosts and goblins and some of the stuff that I enjoy. I mean, I'm sitting here with all the trappings. I'm sitting here with bat lights and a purple room. I love Halloween, but I wanted to, you said to talk about something more universal in that. And yeah, I mean, so for me, Halloween, the metaphor that was staring right at me, that we didn't get to it in the story that I read from, but it's there. But the story I really wanted to, A Girl's Guide, is about growing up, and is about choosing yourself. And maybe one of the things that's fresh about Halloween, or that's maybe fresh about any new situation that you go in, is that it's a new day, it's a new chance to be who you are. And sometimes as a youth, or as a disaffected youth, or as someone who doesn't fit in, or as someone who gets bullied around, that is immensely important. That was immensely important to me as a child. It's still immensely important to me. And I wanted to somehow use the concept of masks and Halloween to address that in a story that was still entertaining and still spooky. And as we talk about it, I see the connections between the two stories where they weren't totally intended there. Thanks for that question.
Oh, sure. No, I love that. I love that last paragraph. It's like a, so with time for one more question. If anyone else has a question for Dan, pop it in there, but I'm going to go ahead and ask one real fast because it's going to be a short answer. This is the dweeby Halloween question. What was your favorite Halloween costume that you ever put on?
Oh, wow. Wow. I don't even have to think about it. Like somewhere out there, I think I was in kindergarten or nursery school. Like my mom was like one of the moms that came and brought like cupcakes for the class and snapped a picture. And pictures, like, I'm 50 years old, so pictures of me and from that time are few and far between. But there's one of my whole Halloween class, and I was wearing a Spider-Man costume, only it wasn't Marvel's Spider-Man. It was like, cheap dime store knockoff of Spider-Man, like, Spider-Man costume. But I loved it. Nonetheless. It was one of those cheap plastic masks with the rubber band, and like I was wearing like a baggie, with the spider on it. And I just remember loving it, and I love those photos. So that's an easy question to answer. My Spider-Man costume.
That's I can tell. I can see your face light up.
Yeah, I wish I could put it on right now, as I get the wonderful job of introducing the next readers. So thank you so much for the introduction and wonderful questions, David.
Great reading, Daniel, by the way.
Thank you so much.
Very good.
Really a pleasure to hear you read.
Thank you so much. Our next reader is going to be EFFRESS, and I first read her story in the book that brought us all together, Nightscript Volume 3. And I remember where I was when I was reading it, and I had my phone next to me. And after I got done reading it, I immediately started recommending it to everyone I knew. And then I reached out to Ina, and we had already started planning our night, A Strange and Darksome Halloween, which was a few years ago. And Ina and I got in touch, and Ina was able to join into the event, which was the beginning of our everyone's friendship here. I was really pleased to be able to stay in touch with Ina, and I was putting together a book called Spirits Unwrapped. It's an anthology from Les Press, and I knew if it was at all possible, I had to have a story from Ina. And She happened to be working on one at the time, and I got the wonderful glimpse at her creative process for the story that came into Spirits Unwrapped. And Ina's been writing ever since, and she's being published in some fantastic places. I think most recently in Weird Horror from Undertow, which I think she's going to be reading from right after I read her official introduction right here. Ina EFFRESS is a speechwriter, fiction writer, and poet who emigrated from Ukraine to the U.S. as a child. Her work has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize and appears in numerous magazines and anthologies, including Strange Tales from Tartarus Press, Weird Horror from Undertow Publications, and the Santa Monica Review, among others, and has been reprinted in the Best Horror of the Year. She has read her work to audiences at Antioch University, the Broad Stage, Lovecraft Bar in New York City, where the event that we all talk about, and on episodes of podcasts such as The Outer Dark and the Lovecraft E-Zine. Her writing examines some of the darkest images from her experiences as an immigrant and daughter of Holocaust survivors. She writes from Los Angeles. Please welcome Ina EFFRESS.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I am going to be reading from Weird Horror. That is the new magazine by Undertow Publications in Canada. The story is called The Devil and the Divine, and I'll be reading approximately 9 minutes of the story, so I'm not going to finish it. On the heels of a cello's moan, the aging tenor closed his eyes. His opening note rang out from the portico and across a torchlit lawn and silenced the patrons. Heat gnawed through their breezy silks. They'd been squirming in their white chairs, arrayed in half-moons on the grass, when the singer's command stilled their beating fans. The night sky flared with shards of the past. It was August on the island. Clava sat with the others, entranced. There was no turning back now. It was her first chance to consider the consequences of her deed. Her face was soft and dreamy, her eyes cold reflective spoons. A violet petunia behind her ear did little to restrain her hair, which flashed out in all directions. If the music were to stop mid-bar, the others would take notice of her. How those blue-black kinks quivered. No, writhed, to the tune of her agitation. The rest of her was coiled with want. Not just any love, the retired doctor had warned, as he slipped the oddity from its dusty box and into her restless palm. It's a token of forbidden love. You have to want it with a carnal desire. And she did. How long before the doctor's guarantee took effect? At any moment, her life would transform, become unrecognizable. She fixated on the spectacle at the center of the arcade. Sure, even now, there were others remaining, a few island performers still in circulation. Sometimes it was true she'd confuse one for another, but none of them had this singer's level of control. There he was, his ecstatic mouth parted, a juicy black plum, facing not the quartet, not the onlookers, but at the open space in between. The singer leaned against a faded column. He was like weather, unpredictable. She could not be certain whether he avoided her gaze out of fear or whether he was oblivious to her presence. It was on a boat packed with strangers, without her husband, that she'd first arrived at these sultry shores. The scenery was nothing like the metropolis where she'd lived with him. Foliage mimicked extravagant plumes of mating birds. Flowers had the chitinous sheen of exoskeleton. In a hot blaze of sea, this tusk of land breached the blue waters like an ancient beast emerging from the loneliest depths. An army of giant banyans garrisoned its shores. Now a refuge for the exiled and displaced, the island had once been a small but thriving kingdom of tree people who had, centuries before, perished in a raging storm. All of this had been conveyed by the oarsmen to Clava and the other passengers as the war-torn continent they were fleeing grew smaller behind them and they entered the warm, interlacing currents that swirled around the island, the fabled home of the spirits of the strangler fig. Around the concert lawn, foxfire glowed brilliant blues and greens on wild mushrooms and dead tree limbs scattered everywhere like spilled matches. The singer's final vocal chimed. It was undeniable. He had to be the one for her. She just knew. She'd been so patient, it seemed like years, or was it only weeks? Sometimes it all struck her as unbearably strange, and she couldn't keep from erupting into her own broken sound. He was bound to her through an unknown sense, which seized her from a distance, followed her, bled from her, and twisted her in its power from waking until sleeping. Clava let the heaviness slip in. The woman seated next to her oozed nostalgia, though Clava didn't understand that sentiment, because this song was new. She didn't know whether to be angry or excited about the unexpected change in the program. Usually, Clava avoided staring at her neighbors or at any of the audience. There was something unnerving about the concerts. It was never clear who, if anyone, would show up. Most kept to themselves, no interest in conversation. As if on cue, the singer's face glistened. Were these his tears, a secret summons, a sly nod to the irrevocable course she had set in motion? Clava tapped an excited finger against the metal of her chair and snuck a closer look at her hand. The ring was painted in miniature with a gentleman's brown eye. How lifelike it was, one shrewd eye on ivory in rose gold encrusted with seed pearls. The ring's weight bore into her palm. The eye's stare admired her. From every angle, the eye watched her and only her. For the eye, only she existed. It had been so long. Clava sat taller. Desperation warps judgment. Early that morning, she'd been to the Saturday Antiquities Market. Her outings to the island's center had become more and more rare, but on this day she was determined to take matters into her own hands. Who did she have to answer to? No one. She'd walked the 2 kilometers inland to the old plaza all on her own, through crushes of flowers and ripening fruits that littered and stained the road. She'd bought the ring from the morose stallkeeper. Specializing in obscurities, read the sign hanging on the lintel of his kiosk, and underneath a disclosure, mainland oculist discharged. A bright harlequin pattern had graced his awning. The trick, the doctor had said, to ensnaring the object of your passion lies in the undying gaze of another. He'd coughed, and his sharp Adam's apple quivered too long. Once you become the one beheld, once you are no longer the anguished beholder, he'd stretched his slow, bony legs up onto the table with a crack and continued. At that moment, the transformation will take effect. It all starts with illusion. If there was a price to pay beyond her money, she didn't know it, not yet. After the night's performance, she pulled her neckline even lower and waited out of sight in the shadows of the bougainvillea garden. This fertile land spit flora like tumors from its soil. A tragedy, thought Clava, as she ripped a surprised bloom from its stalk, for so vivid a flower to bear no scent. Still, paradise was approaching. It was just steps away in the new form of her beloved. Soon he'd be incapable of tearing his gaze from her. In the darkness, she listened to her own breathing. There were 2 sharp cracks as a mangrove limb snapped. Barely attached now, the limb swayed there, thick, the height of a man. The leaves at the end of the lowest branch pointed at the ground like 2 bound feet. Clava squinted. She gasped, then turned away, defiant. Nothing was going to spoil her chance at happiness. The ocean rumbled in the distance. I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Okay. Wow. What great reading, Ina. I love that story. I've had a chance to read the whole story in my copy of Weird Horror. Totally recommend you guys picking it up. Hear the rest of the story. I adore stories that are where setting is present and upfront. There's a lot of great things going on in that story, and just one of them is the fantastic setting. So I particularly like that story. I'm going to ask a question of Ina before I turn it over to Ina, who will introduce our next reader. We were backstage getting ready for the show, and I was talking to our engineer, Matt Kressel. We were talking about horror and what constitutes horror. There's so many different definitions for it, and there's no the great thing is there's no right answer. Like on the spectrum, we have the kind of stories that someone just the other day was calling comfort food horror, and it was an interesting way of putting it, because that's the kind of horror that maybe is full of jump scares. That's maybe the kind of horror where there's excuse me, delineated good versus evil. And even though it may get kind of dark, it's the sort of horror that comes with the expectation that evil is going to be put in its place and things are defined. And even though we're scared or jump scared right now, it's comforting to us, and we can watch it and we can take the ride because we know where that ride ends up. All the way over on the other end of the spectrum, and this is just a spectrum that I'm making up, is the kind of horror that is maybe a little more bleaker, or at least bleaker in the sense that maybe it's more Scorsese gray. Maybe the good guys and the bad guys aren't defined. Maybe there isn't a sense of what's happening at all, or there isn't a resolution, or there isn't a happy resolution, and our sense of importance in the world isn't a given or guaranteed. So my question to send over to Ina is, on playing in the realm of that spectrum, what kind of horror, or where on that continuum, what interests you as a writer of horror, or even a reader of it?
Yeah,
And why?
thanks. Yeah, I appreciate that question so much. It's a very interesting question to me. And I think personally, when I'm writing, and I think a lot of us do this, where we don't know necessarily what's coming next. So when I'm writing, I'm trying to answer something or realize something. And sometimes that realization is kind of terrible. And that's the kind of anything I like to write, whether it's horror or poetry, and usually, and I'm not even trying to write horror. It comes out dark, because that's the process. So I very much prefer things that are blurry and gray, and terrible that way, because they're not clear. It's interesting. I was just talking to my daughter the other day. She's reading Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in her high school English class. And she was showing me a passage from the book where the monster realizes that he doesn't have human attributes, and understands that he is not human. And what's so interesting about that is, like, just the act of realizing it sort of makes him more human than a lot of humans, and him not knowing that. And so I really like this like vague, gray, never being able to reach the end or the wish, and exposing like the darkness that's within all of us. And, you know, we are really the monsters.
I think that's a great answer. It was a bit of a loaded question because I know I know that's a sort of horror the four of us do, right? You could find stories from us and other kinds of stories like that in C.M. Muller's Nightscript series, and in look, there's no right or wrong. Like, you can like both, you can like one, the other, any place on the continuum. But yeah, there's just this kind of horror, or there's this kind of fiction that's exactly as Ina describes it. I really like the way you put the realization or the sense of an epiphany. You can't teach how to infuse that into writing, and that's why maybe it's so exciting as a writer to aim for it. And it's the sort of fiction that's just so exciting for me as a reader when you get to read it. In the chat room, Ina, you had the Mike was clapping for you, and Ross.
Thank you.
And Ross had read it and loved hearing it aloud and loved the story.
Thanks very much.
So the continuing with the second question, which will continue on David's theme of giving a Halloween like question, are there, given that you've established that kind of horror that you like, and even just that kind of story that you like, are there any supernatural stories from your youth or your background that have stayed with you or intrigued you, or anything right now that is just been capturing you, and why?
No, like, you mean like real life supernatural stories that happened?
I was thinking more like fiction, more like what are some of the fictional stories that, and they don't have to be horror, like you mentioned your daughter was reading Frankenstein, which is almost, it transcends horror because it's a classic, but
Right.
like, is there anything that a story like that, like when you were your daughter's age, that had those attributes?
I remember when I was her age, I was just a really major Stephen King fan.
Oh yeah.
So, and it was like, when I was, I don't know, 13, I don't remember the age, but it was Pet Sematary.
Yeah.
Was the first thing that I read in that genre, where I thought, wow, and I was kind of hooked on that kind of writing for a while.
Oh yeah. Wow, I think we probably could talk forever about Pet Sematary, so I'm not even going to open the bag of goodness on that, because we would just talk forever. And instead, I'm just going to turn it over to Ina, who is going to introduce our next author. Oh, and I decided it's the part of the show where I'm just going to wear my glowing lights.
Excellent. It's still a little light here on the West Coast, so
you can't be creepy.
Yeah. But I am really delighted to be able to introduce Julia Rust. So as we said, the four of us met in New York City at the Lovecraft Bar for Daniel's Nighttime Logic series, because we all appeared together in the Nightscript anthology. And that show was on the Outer Dark podcast. And I remember after we all got to read, we took questions from the audience and each other. And somebody asked me what my favorite stories were in the anthology. And without even thinking about it, I knew that one of my favorite stories was written by Julia, because I had just started reading poetry, and it just had such a poetic rhythm to it. Her writing, her sentences were beautiful, and she delivered the reading so beautifully too. And I'll read her bio here. Julia Rust is a writer and teaching artist living within view of the Hudson River, New York. She was previously published in Nightscript Volume 3 and a featured reader for A Strange and Darksome Night, hosted by Nighttime Logic and NYC with the other readers tonight. Her stories can be found in Bull and Cross, Many Mountains Moving, and the Cortland Review. A collaborative short story with husband David Surface was published in the anthology Uncertainties, Volume 3, which Ellen Datlow included on her recommended list in Best Horror of the Year for 2019. Julia and David are seeking representation for their YA supernatural novel, Angel Falls, and have begun to collaborate on another book, working title, New Novel. She will be reading from her story, published in Nightscript Volume 6.
Oh, thank you. Very kind of you, Ina. And the sentiment's the same, and I loved your reading, by the way. Okay, this is, I'm going to be reading about 2/3 of this story because of the time limitations, and it's called What Crows Mean. The crows are speaking to her. People write the sound of crows as caw, but Caroline knows better. Her crows sound like people. She is beginning to make out what they say. Caroline used to live by the ocean, another kind of conversation. The sound of the water told her many things, things she wished she'd never heard, death things. And gulls, they mewed and squawked and chattered, but Caroline never really understood them. Even so, she misses the incessant speech and movement of the sea. She'd say to George, "Let's go to the sea." And he would pause and look at her, his eyes, if not his mouth, clearly asking, "Are you sure?" Today, she's raking leaves, a futile task as the wind picks from her pile, redistributes leaves over the bare grass she has just cleared. "Stop," she says to the wind. "Cut it out," she tells the thin, brittle stems on the trees as they continually break and drop their leaf cargo. No end until the end. "Look, look, look," the crows say, and she stares first at them, then away toward the woods where they are looking. The wind noise changes and she smells salt sea air, hears waves crashing. No, she shakes her head, but the break in the trees beckons and she obeys. It's a path Caroline knows well, and yet today it's strange. All swirling leaves and ocean noise, and she feels like she's underwater. Take care," the crows cry, and she gasps and struggles, crying out, "Help!" And George is there, lifting her out of the swirling leaves, telling her to breathe. The crows laugh. "Bastards," she whispers. At the breakfast table, Caroline reads aloud. The actual cause of death in drowning is asphyxiation. At first, the throat closes to prevent the influx of water to the lungs, but eventually the body relinquishes, the throat opens, and the lungs, incapable of filtering oxygen from water, cease to provide the air a human needs, and the subject expires. "Why do you do this to yourself?" George asks, his face in his hands so she can't read his expression. "Do what?" she asks, hearing the crows outside her window. There she goes, ha, there she goes. Caroline wants to ask them, "Where do I go?" But the crows just laugh. "I think I'll go for a walk. Want to join me?" she asks, and is happy when George lifts his face, shifting worry aside to smile at her and nod. The path is clear today, the wind doing them a favor, and the woods are cool and smell of wood fires and damp and late blooming roses. There, she points to a gangly, thorny stem, pale pink flower missing half its petals, a fat bee, perfectly still, sitting on its dull yellow center. Maybe he's dead. The crows have gone, the ocean sounds have gone, and Caroline is disoriented. What day is it? Does it matter? Of course it does. Panic blooming in her, even as George takes and squeezes her hand, even as the woods open up to a great park, their daily destination, a winding path to the wide expanse of river, resembling, but not sounding like the sea. Do you want to go home? After dinner, there's a fire in the fireplace. Caroline doesn't remember lighting it, doesn't remember seeing George do it. That's nice, she says, watching the flames lick the logs and bright eyes appear, winking over grimacing mouths. She never remembers the dream she wakes from, screaming. George says it's for the best. Chocolate cream pie, he'll say, with a ghost of a smile, a ghost of the man she fell in love with, the one standing alone in the great hall of Grand Central, studying a piece of paper and looking around him, the picture of a little boy lost, although he was 26 at the time. Caroline wasn't one to flirt, to pick up men, nor did she go out of her way to help the helpless, yet on this day, with this man, everything changed. "Are you lost?" she'd asked. And he turned on his smile. It switched that same way, going from nondescript dull to blazing brilliant light. She had felt her knees actually go weak. The cliche used in the novels she read, it actually happened to her. "Are you lost?" And she was. "Salted caramel ice cream," he says this morning, ghost smile remaining briefly before sliding away and leaving his face a little paler than before. "But what do I dream? Did I say anything?" And he turns his sad, sagging face away, pulls her close, and remains silent. The next day, she can make out entire sentences from the crows. "She doesn't know, ha ha," says the one on the ground. "Doesn't care neither, do you, love?" This one is in the locust tree, his head cocked, shiny black eye staring directly at her. "Bet her husband does, don't he?" says the one at the very top of the white pine. When she tells George, he looks at her for a long time before saying slowly, "It sounds so much like talking, doesn't it?" "They said you knew something." "What did I know?" "They didn't say. I asked them, but they flew away." He pulls her arm through his and resumes their walk. "Maybe we should find them and ask." "You mean you don't know?" Who knows what crows mean? They make their way to the ocean early one Saturday. George has given in to her requests. She watched him do it. A physical thing, a laying down of swords. He must have been a knight in a former life. He has that bearing still. So they pack a lunch, beach chairs, hats. She can smell it already. They play music in the car. Glenn Gould playing Buck. Ella and Lewis singing Cole Porter. "It's still lovely," Caroline sings along. Then Johnny Cash singing Hurt. It sounds like crows. She turns it off. Caroline loves the way the buildings and trees fall away, making more sky, more light. Then the smell, tangy, briny, hint of fish, tingling in the nose like steam. They park behind a dune, no water yet, but so present in the flat expanse of unbroken sky, in the sounds, a gentle roaring and shushing, roar and shush, and gulls, of course. Caroline pays particular attention to the gulls, but they all make the same sound. It sounds like mew. They reach the top of the path, and there it is, a great expanse of white-capped greenish blue. Away from the shore, the water sparkles, but closer in, it's foamy and laced with seaweed. Caroline closes her eyes and imagines the water lapping against her legs, not cold the way it is at first, but warm and delicious in its caresses. "Caroline?" She opens her eyes in time to catch a worried look from George. His face falls quickly, muscles released from their frown, then gathering up into a weak smile. "Where would you like to settle?" They're not the only people there, but the blankets and chairs are sparse and far apart. The tide is coming in, so they pick a spot well away from the water, blankets spread, chairs open. And then George offers his arm. Caroline takes it, pulling close beside him, and they walk, parallel to the sea. The sun tries its best to make them warm, but the wind off the water is chilly, and Caroline burrows closer to her husband. He wraps his arm around her shoulders. "Too cold for you?" he asks. Caroline responds, "Are you glad you married me?" "Yes, I'm glad," he says, kissing the top of her head. Did he hesitate? Was there a note of falsehood in his voice? The crows would know. For a moment, she thinks she hears them, their raucous noise, not actual words, but when she looks around, she sees only gulls. I'm very glad, she says, pulling closer, unsure if she means glad he married her or something else. Back at their blanket, they sit and pull out the sandwiches, fruit, the bottles of iced tea. When they're done eating, Caroline leans back, stretching out her legs while George drapes a blanket over her. She gives him a grateful smile and closes her eyes. The sound of the waves, the wind, the sun combine to rock her, and she slips away. When she opens her eyes, she sees crows hovering over the water. They let the air hold them, wings extended, and they face her, saying, "Come in, Caroline." And then her body is shaking. She is being shaken, and when she opens her eyes again, George is standing over her, calling her name, "Caroline, Caroline," over and over. She can see people staring at George, tension in their bodies as if they're about to run. What happened? You had one of your nightmares, is what he says, but in his eyes, she can make out her own face screaming. That is why people are standing there. I'm sorry, she repeats, but what was I dreaming? George is flustered, fumbling now with their picnic things, knocking over a bottle of tea and cursing. She watches the brown liquid soaking the blanket. I'll get you home now. It was a bad idea. As she stands to help him, a woman her age steps up and touches her arm. Are you all right? Her eyes are brown, and one of them reflects the light in an odd way. Of course I am. Did I frighten you? The woman steps back, eyes growing wide. Well, I didn't. She's fine. George steps between them. I'm going to take her home now. His voice is angry. Caroline wonders what the woman with the funny eye did to him. She'll try to remember to ask him in the car. And that is when she sees the crows. Just like in her dream, they hover above the sea, looking suspended from above. And just like earlier, they're speaking to her, inviting her in the water. I want to go for a swim, she says, walking straight down the beach, too quickly for George's reaching hand to stop. No, he shouts, and Caroline breaks eye contact with the crows to turn toward George. He grabs her arm. You're hurting me. She tries to pull away, but he holds on tight, pulling her into his arms. They stay there for a long moment. Then icy water seeps inside her shoes and Caroline shrieks and high steps up the beach past the waterline, George high-stepping beside her. Caroline notices a small group of people watching them. She and George stand silently for several moments, and then Caroline leans down, takes off her shoes, walks over to the blanket and picks up the basket. George follows, and they leave the beach and drive home in silence. That night, Caroline wakes up and finds herself in the ocean, the waves very calm, gently rocking her floating body. And then small arms slide around her throat from behind. A small, wet face presses tightly against hers, and she begins to choke. The waves grow larger, more violent as the arms squeeze her tightly. She's going under. She fights the tiny figure on her back, drags her nails into the small arms, manages to twist her way around until her throat is free, then fights hard to gain the surface. Must breathe now, but the small figure attached to her keeps her under. She fights again, kicking her feet hard and pulling with her arms until her face breaks the water and she can spit out the old air in her bursting lungs, take in a breath. And then she's underwater again and breathing water, choking and fighting and drowning. And there are hands on her arms and a voice from far away saying something that sounds like Caroline. The next day, she's looking for something in the back of a closet in a spare room. Partway through, she forgets what she wanted, but the treasure trove of old, forgotten items captures her fancy. So she sits on the floor and pulls out box after box, rifling their contents in wonder. When George finds her, she has set up a toy circus, small trapeze, 3 rings, elephants and ringmaster. Ladies and gentlemen, she says in a deep voice, in the center ring, we have Marvo the Magnificent and his amazing elephants. George doesn't laugh. He doesn't smile. What's wrong? She feels a tightness in her chest. Do you, he begins and stops. Where did you, he stops again. He wipes his face with his hand exactly as he would with a washcloth. And when he's through, he starts to smile. It takes a long time for the smile to reach his eyes. It's a day without crows, and Caroline misses them. She heads out toward the river, glancing up into the trees from time to time, but hearing the twitters of sparrows, finches, the warbling of woodpeckers. By the time she returns to the house, she's forgotten what she went looking for. Inside, she can hear George laughing. It makes her smile, so she rushes inside to learn the joke, the source. But as she makes her way down the suddenly long hall, she recognizes something about the sound. She realizes he isn't laughing at all. George is sobbing. And she hears another voice, a woman murmuring softly, comfortingly. When she rounds the corner into the living room, she sees George huddled against a woman, his face pressed into her shoulder, the woman's arms tight around him, gently rocking. Caroline is about to speak, but George says, I miss her so much, and gives another heaving sob. I just want her back. Mrs. Who? Caroline wonders in alarm. And now the woman speaks, and Caroline realizes who she is. It is her sister-in-law, Grace. Hush now, Grace murmurs. I know, it'll be all right. Among the many feelings brought up by George's sobbing, there is anger and resentment at his sister. She, Caroline, should be comforting him. Who are you talking about, dear? Why are you unhappy? She feels deep compassion towards him, despite the terror rising. Who is it he misses so much? George pulls himself up, away from his sister in a single graceless move, wiping his face and turning away from Caroline, but not before she sees guilt. Caroline, Grace begins. She too looks caught. George, sweetheart. And Caroline steps across what suddenly feels like a wide chasm into the space right in front of her husband, the space where he should wrap his long limbs around her, staking his claim. She puts her hands on his wet face. Who do you miss? And it wouldn't have mattered, except for the crows. Later that day, he's hiding something. You need to look. A large bird with some missing tail feathers tells her. Hiding what? His life. You have to look. It's in the house. And that's where I'm going to end.
Wonderful. That was really, really wonderful. A lot of tension
Thank you, Dan.
in
Showing the book
every
cover.
scene.
Nightscript Volume 6.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, that was, and now I really want to read through to the end of that story. That is the kind of writing I really enjoy. I love that it's like a dream within a dream within a dream. And so I'm just wondering, Julia, I'm going to ask you a little bit about your writing process, because I want to know, when you're writing this, are you going into, like, are you a little bit in a kind of a different state, or is every word intentional?
Wow, that's a great question. A little bit of both. I think the writing that I like the best and keep the best, I think, like the writing that ends up staying, is more of the stuff that comes from the ether. Mm-hmm. When you sort of through writing a bunch of stuff that doesn't make it into the final version, you find the story, you find the voice, you find the dream quality. Like this piece started with the crows and just meandered into a place I was very pleased with how it went, and pleased with every time I read, which is amazing to me that, you know, I can like a piece of writing that I did that much. And so, yeah, it's, I think it's, it starts like with an imagery. Usually I have some vision of something and I'll try to describe it, and then I'll try to describe, you know, the action, like what would that lead this person to do, you know, or lead the other character to do. I think very kind of in terms of plays, in terms of theater, which is another background of mine. But yeah.
I actually want to ask you too for a second question about the theater. But first, I just want to let you know what people are saying about your reading here in the comments. Chilling and sad, and cliffhanger. Excellent. And I think this is David's sister who says brava.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, really good. And I do want to ask you about theater, because I know that you're still an actor. You know, I've seen, you know, photos of you on stage that your proud husband has posted. And I'm just wondering if that, I mean, the theater must inform your fiction somehow, or are those two like totally separate parts of your brain?
Not at all. I think inhabiting a character for stage is very much like inhabiting a character on the page. When I teach writing too, and I'm talking to my students, I'm usually saying, you know, let us go into, you know, what they're experiencing. And it means putting you there. It means really inhabiting it the way an actor does a role. Is you can feel it in your body, you know, and then that's what you describe. You don't say frightened, you say, you know, stomach's tightened, or, you know, hairs in the back of my neck, or, you know, you have a physical reaction to things. And that's the writing that I like, and the writing that I'm amazed when I can produce does that, you know, that feels like it's a little new, says it a little differently, and just says it true. David always calls it like putting a Geiger counter over your story to see where, you know, where it's really clicking, and when it goes off, you know, you can kind of feel maybe, you know, this isn't just the most powerful way to say this. But.
Excellent. And then a couple more people just commented. I wanted to make sure you heard. Midge says, loved it, Julia. Thanks for the invite. And Pete says, honestly hanging on every word. That's a great job.
Thank you so much.
And then what's next, Daniel?
Oh, so now I believe Julia is now we'll turn it over to Julia, who will be introducing our next and final reader, David Surface.
Well, I have the great good fortune of being married to the guy. And we started our friendship through writing. He was a workshop leader, and I took his workshop, and he taught me everything I know. So you could say if you like that story, it's all due to him. I'm very proud of his collection that came out this year, Terrible Things, from Black Shuck Books. I read all the stories. Some of them I actually, read in draft form, and got to say little comments on, and he seemed to like that. And so it's, I feel like a little bit of me is in that book. But David has stories in Shadows and Tall Trees, Supernatural Tales, Nightscript, Morpheus Tales, the 10th Black Book of Horror. He was in an anthology, Twisted Book of Shadows from Haverhill House Publications, which was a Shirley Jackson award-winning anthology. Bravo. Also, Darkest Minds and Ghost Highways anthologies. Darkest Minds from Dark Minds Press, Ghost Highways from Midnight Street Press. They mention in my bio, Uncertainties 3 was a story that we co-authored with the honorable mention that's called Tall Dark End. And we had so much fun writing it. We have a lot of fun writing together, by the way, that thing about, we have one novel that we've done and we have a new novel started, and it's just a blast to write with this guy. His stories have received numerous honorable mentions in Ellen Datlow's Best Horror of the Year. He's been nominated for Pushcart Prize on more than one occasion. And he's a regular contributor to Black Static magazine, where his column, One Good Story, appears in the case notes section. So you're really going to enjoy this story. Take it away, David.
Thanks, Julia. Anyway, this has been a blast. I'm going to read a story called The Professor of History. I think I can squeeze it in. Daniel, feel free to bring out the hook if that becomes necessary. But anyway, this is from Terrible Things. It's called The Professor of History. The Professor of History is hosting an open house on Halloween night. He has kept this tradition for over 30 years. Some of the parents who bring their children here can remember peering up at this old house through the eye holes in their own dime store masks many years ago. The Professor of History does not decorate his house for Halloween. No fiberglass spiderwebs, no styrofoam tombstones with funny epitaphs. The house itself is the decoration. 100 years old and 3 stories tall with many windows, all of them dark but one, hidden in a grove of ancient oak trees with thick limbs that have grown into tangled arterial shapes. The Professor of History appears at the door and welcomes the children and parents who have gathered here on his front porch. He is an old man, somewhere in his 70s, short with a pot belly and a fringe of white hair that rises like wings from the sides of his head. He has a grandfatherly smile, a gentle voice, sweet and melodious. There is, in short, nothing frightening about him. The boy who has come to this house for the first time tonight is disappointed. He had expected a more imposing presence, someone taller, more sinister. The Professor of History is about as sinister as Santa Claus. Tonight, the boy is accompanied by his father for the first time. Last year it was his mother, and it hits him somewhere in his stomach that last year really means the last year. There are other children here with their fathers, their mothers not visible, but he and his father are different. They are alone now, the two of them, and he imagines that anyone who looks at them long enough can tell. The first thing the boy notices inside the house is books. Books bristling from shelves on every wall, books stacked on tables and cabinets, lined up in neat rows along the floor. The boy has never seen so many books in one home. A little girl asks the Professor of History if he has really read all these books. He chuckles and tells her no, but his wife did. These are my wife's books, he tells them. She read them all, every one of them. The boy stares at the books and is struck by a sudden memory of his mother reading to him at bedtime. In the memory, he can see the book open in front of them, her pale, slender hands turning the pages, but her face, which is hovering right behind his, he cannot see or even bring to mind. The boy follows the Professor of History through the dining room and past a long wooden table big enough for a banquet. He sees several bowls of candy and a punch bowl full of apple cider. In the center, there is a pumpkin with a smiling face painted on it, topped with a straw gardener's hat that looks like something a woman might have once worn. The Professor of History leads his guests into the front hall, where they gather at the foot of the stairs and wait for the story they have all come to hear. In the story the Professor of History tells, there was a girl who lived in this house long ago. There was a boy who she was in love with, but the girl's father did not approve and forbade her from seeing the boy. To the girl, this was exactly like dying. The boy had become part of her. They had become part of each other, and she could not imagine life without him. That is what love is. It occurs to the boy that he does not know what this boy and girl knew. He does not know what love is. He remembers hearing his parents' voices raised in the kitchen on that last night, their ugly, incomprehensible words. You don't know what love is. His mother had yelled this, or was it his father? When he woke the next morning, the house had looked different. Then he realized what had changed. Every picture of his mother was gone. Her face that had smiled down at him from every wall was now absent. Later, when he finally said that he wanted to see a picture of his mother, his father glared at him until he felt afraid and went back to his room. Later that night, The boy had looked up to see his father's silhouette filling the doorway, swaying back and forth, blocking out the hallway light. "You want to see your mother?" The boy could not speak. He watched his father move toward him, toss something on the bed, then turn and stagger out of the room. The boy waited till he heard his father's footsteps shuffling further and further away, then turned on the bedroom light and picked up the object. It was a photograph of his father, younger and smiling with the ocean at his back, a woman's body standing close by him, but where the woman's face had been was a jagged hole where someone had taken a sharp object and gouged it out. The boy stared at the hole for a long time until he could see something slowly coming into focus, like an object in deep water rising toward the surface at tremendous speed. He pushed the picture under the bed and left the room. And when he came back for it the next day, it was gone. The professor of history continues his story. One night, the boy came to the house in the middle of the night. Here the story changes year to year. Sometimes it's the boy who kills the father. Sometimes it's the father who kills the boy. The boy listens to this story and imagines all the other versions that the professor of history doesn't tell, hiding behind the one he tells tonight, the one in which the father kills the boy. The boy is sure somehow that this is wrong, that it was the boy who killed the father. When the story is over, the professor of history shows his guests the bloodstains on the hallway floor. The children all crowd around, jostling to see. The boy looks hard and sees what looks like a faint brownish discoloration in the wooden floorboards. It reminds him of rusty water stains on his bathroom ceiling at home. It's disappointing, not what he expected. Still, there is something there. The professor of history leads the group back to the banquet table. The children all grab fistfuls of candy while the professor of history offers the adults a glass of the orange wine his wife used to make. The boy drops a half-dozen peppermints in his trick-or-treat bag and wonders if this means it's over, if this is all that's going to happen tonight. On the way out the door, the boy finally asks the question he's been wanting to ask. Is your house really haunted? The professor of history smiles and says something the boy will remember even after he's grown and looking back on this night. That depends on what you mean by haunted. Later that night, the boy waits for his father to fall asleep in front of the TV, then slips past the flickering glow and stale smell of whiskey and out the door. There is no one on the street at this hour, only jack-o'-lanterns all gone out except for one that glowers at him with a weak and dying light. The boy keeps walking until he sees the professor of history's house rising in front of him. Its many windows dark now. He goes to the tall window to the left of the front door and looks inside, stares into the blackness until his eyes start to throb. And there he sees a small light floating through the darkness. It reminds him of a firefly. The light comes to rest, hovers motionless in the blackness. The boy stares at the light till his eyes ache, waiting for it to move again. Another light appears from the same direction and moves across the room, coming to rest just above the other. Then another. And another. The boy watches until the little lights form a kind of chain that arcs upward in the dark, and in their combined light he can now see what they are. Candles, each one lighting the way up a long staircase. He keeps staring until he understands what he's seeing. Not stairs, books. Hundreds and hundreds of books. His wife's books that the professor of history has used to build a staircase that reaches from the floor all the way up into a darkness that the boy's eyes cannot penetrate. The professor of history enters the room carrying a single book and a glass of orange wine. The boy watches the professor move a chair to the foot of the strange staircase where the candles lead upward like runway lights into a darkness that is already growing thicker and heavier like a sky before a storm. The professor of history smiles and opens the book. He sits. He waits. The boy feels something like a cold light growing brighter and brighter inside his chest, rising to fill his head, but he cannot look away from the spot at the top of the strange staircase where the darkness has started to gather and swirl like a cup of ink poured into dark water. Years later, when his own children are still young enough to beg for stories, they will ask what he saw step out of that black cloud at the top of those stairs that Halloween long ago. And he will describe for the 100th time how the professor of history's wife stepped out of the darkness, out of another world, and began her slow, ethereal descent. He will tell them how she wore the straw gardener's hat he'd seen on the pumpkin earlier that evening, how her plump, smiling cheek bore a single smudge of potting soil. He will tell how each candle flame shone through her body as she passed in front of them, on her way down to her husband waiting faithfully below. What he will not tell them, what he will never tell them, is what he really saw. How what had stepped out of the darkness at the top of those stairs had worn his mother's face, familiar but changed, her mouth a jagged black gash, the eyes gouged out lightless pits. He will not tell them about the broken way she walked, like a crippled bird or an insect. He will not mention the dark and faceless thing that walked beside her, whose arm she clutched, or the horrible way they were joined together that made their walking ugly and strange as they descended. It was not the kind of thing you tell your children. And when they ask, as they always do, "Daddy, did you really see a ghost?" he will not know what to say. That's it.
Ah, wonderful, wonderful. So can we do a quick question? I know we're at the end of our hour and a half, Dan.
Oh, we're good with time, so yeah,
Yeah.
just ask David your questions and
That was great. I haven't looked at that story in a really long time, so it was kind of like hearing it anew.
Thanks.
And my question, yeah, very very nice. Terrible Things, available online in many places. Kaylee Surface says, "Yay, so good." You got that was wonderful. What a turn! Truly horrific, wicked. You're getting a lot of props. Okay, because I know that this story started a little in a different place and went through a bunch of revisions. I'd like to ask about your process of revision. Is what makes you go into a story that you think is done and change it, and how do you know a story's done?
Oh God, I'll answer them all except that last question. That's freaking impossible. Everybody knows that. Well, I mean, this story in particular, some of the people here in the chat room know this. This is a real place. This is a real house right down the road from my mother's house where I grew up in Bowling Green, Kentucky. It was the murder mansion, and everything in this story is absolutely true. The sweet old couple who had the house and would bring kids in and show them the bloodstains. And that was the thing. There was a horrific murder, like multiple murders there in this house one night back in the, I think the 1950s. Just horrible stuff. And so it was like the combination of this sweet, friendly, kind of like Daniel was talking about comfort food. This is sort of like this friendly, warm Halloween memory, but actually it was because of this horrible, awful thing that happened. So the first thing I wrote was just kind of a warm, friendly, Ray Bradbury, like holiday memory of going to that place. And the more I looked at it, the more I thought I really wanted that dark element to come out. So I added the boy and his father and his missing mother. And that's, basically everybody knows this, where you start writing about something. You start writing about something more or less true, and then that fictional element comes in. And that's what happened. That's what happened there. I just let the dark stuff come in.
Oh, there's a question, but it's not that. James Henry says, "Do you know that there's a just released book?" Yeah. Thanks, Dan.
I think it's
The Murder Mansion.
Yes, I saw that. I saw that come up on Facebook. Yeah. Someone just put in a book about it. I don't know how many books there are about it, but yeah, they just came out. Yeah, the new owners put a swimming pool in the back, and that's just wrong. But,
All right. The next question is, what are you going to be for Halloween?
What am I going to be for? Nothing. I don't think. Are we dressing up? I don't think we're dressing up. I think we're dressing up.
You'll be naked for Halloween.
Naked for Halloween? At some point, I plan to be naked for Halloween, but I'm not sure when exactly. But yeah. No, I was just going to say, but my favorite Halloween costume of all time, since I asked Daniel that, I think you know this too, is for about 30 years in a row, Lon Chaney Sr. in London After Midnight. You cannot beat Lon Chaney Sr. in London After Midnight. So, but I won't be doing that this year. I'm sad to say.
Oh.
I'll be Lon Chaney in my mind. And so
Does anyone else in the chat room have any questions for any of us, all of us, or in absence of that, any of we four have any questions we want to pose in the last few minutes? We'll enter the Q&A tail end of our program.
Okay. Well, I wanted to ask Ina what she's working on now. Where are you working on now?
I am working on a story that is driving me crazy. I keep going back to the beginning of it, and the way I write is I have to go back to the beginning every single time I sit down. Do you do that? Does anybody do that?
Sometimes I do. Yeah.
Yeah. The longer it gets, the harder that becomes. You know.
Yeah. So it's just awful. So I'm working on a story. Actually, when Julia started her story, and she was talking about describing a lot of sounds. My story also is like focuses on sound, and I was really interested in that. So thank you for the question. And I see Clint Smith is saying, David, I'm only driven by those ivy netted Kentucky mansions.
Yeah. Well, come on down sometime, Clint, when I'm down visiting my mom, and I'll take you by the murder mansion. We'll pop in. Clint's a wonderful writer. His Skeleton Melodies came out recently, and it kicked my butt, and continues to. But yeah, so Clint, you and me in Kentucky. Clint's from the same part of the world, roughly, as I am. So when I read his stories, I feel like I know the flora and the fauna and the skies and the whatnot. You know, just good connection there.
David, what are you working on now, or what are you and Julia working on now?
We are not working presently on that second novel she was talking about. No, we're off to a good start. What am I doing? I started writing a story. Actually, I started writing a story for Mike Kelly for the next issue of Weird Horror. I mean, just to submit, and it got away from me, and it's turned into I think it's a novel. I'm not sure, but it's called All the Water in the World, and it's just I don't know. I'm having a lot of fun. I'm having a lot of fun with it.
Great title.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, it's I'm having a lot of fun. Julia has not read it yet, so.
I'm about to read the first quarter of it or something.
Yeah.
The first bit of it, yeah.
She's about to suffer for my art.
Yeah.
We have a round robin question from Ross from the chat room. Question from everyone is, do you have a favorite book or story you read around Halloween? So we will start with Ina and go counterclockwise with it.
You know, I don't know. I don't have one that I read around Halloween per se. But no, I don't have a favorite story that I read around Halloween. But I don't know. I always like scary or dark stories. But I do often repeat. Like I'll go back in and read the same story over and over again. And the first author I did that with was Ricky Ducournay. And the stories in Butcher's Tales. And a lot of times I sit down. Oh, it was Spanish Oranges was in Butcher's Tales. It's a very short story, but sometimes I had to read it before writing just to get that, like, a sense of language again.
That's great. That sounds great.
What about you guys?
I don't know about we have our Halloween movie festival, and a lot of the movies are based on books, but I know that doesn't count exactly. Something Wicked This Way Comes, the movie and the book, but I don't read it at Halloween. We should. That's a really great idea. I'm always reading. I have some novels going somewhere, and then all the short story collections of our friends here and in our audience. That takes up a certain amount of reading time, but nothing's really the turn of the screw. It's a great one. I mean, nothing else comes to mind. David?
Well, like you said, movies, as is the case with a lot of us, they sort of, shove the books out of the way sometimes, which is a shame. I try to dip into Something Wicked. Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury, just in case someone out there hasn't read it. It's probably the most wonderful. And I think, does Halloween happen in the book? I don't even think it takes place in
it says very specifically that Halloween came early that year.
Yeah, exactly.
Carnival comes, yeah.
It's a beautiful, beautiful book full of, childhood, the childhood thrill of Halloween, thrill and mystery of Halloween, plus like dark adult, like mortality and dread, and the two intersect, and it's beautiful. Ray Bradbury, when he was firing on all cylinders, could just write a sentence that would make you sing and break your heart. Yeah. But I'm too lazy to read the whole thing at Halloween time, so I'll dip into it. I'll take like a little hit, but it's the best. The best. What about you, Daniel?
I like that. I'm gonna take a hit of Ray Bradbury, and I think I am gonna take. I have not read Something Wicked. I am an extreme newcomer to Bradbury, so I think tonight I am gonna take a hit of Ray Bradbury. I'm gonna take some down and treat myself to some of it. I'm a Halloween 365 days a year kind of a person, so the question confuses me. But if we're talking about now, I was thinking about it. I'm like, oh no, I don't read anything. But I just realized that a new Halloween tradition, new in the last maybe 3 or 4 years, is that I always get a copy of Nightscript, whether I'm in the book or not, whether I know people in the book or not. It's just it's the kind of horror that we like. It's it never disappoints. It always gives me something new, and I always make sure to support that effort to make sure that book is still there for years to come, and to make sure I always have a hit of Nightscript. Even if I don't get to read the whole book, I always do in the month of October get to read something from it. So that's my Halloween one. Yeah. And I'm a newcomer to Bradbury. I just picked up within the last year or two a copy of The October Country. I was reading, I think the story's called I think it's The Last in Line. It was Bradbury's, I believe it's in there, the mummy story, the one set in Mexico. Wonderful, wonderful book. But I think unless anyone has any more questions, we're gonna maybe just do our outroduction. We'll get ready to wrap it up. Any last questions from the chat room? Clint Smith has a message. The 4 of you are contemporary inspirations. Thanks for this season-suiting reading. Hope this turns annual, which is a wonderful idea, which we'll have to think about a little bit more. Wrapping it up here, just before we say our goodbyes or see you later's bye for now, a couple of some seasonal news. I'll just say what's up next. Please bookmark this channel or give it a like or a save. I'm not sure how that works on YouTube, because in January and December, we'll be bringing you some more weird fiction, some more great contemporary writing. The next Nighttime Logic guest, I guess we're announcing it here, is going to be the great Sarah Langan on January 14th. We'll be having a full episode talking about her new book and her work on January 14th. So we'll put that out there and hope you could tune back in. And speaking of seasonal, you mentioned the Halloween season. There is a Christmas season book that if I don't always revisit it, I always think about it. It's A Christmas Carol, which is just a wonderful Christmas book, but it's a wonderful ghost story. And one of the things that the 4 of us have talked about before, and other author friends of mine. I was just getting together, like, maybe we laugh about it, maybe we're serious. So just bringing ghost stories back to these December nights. And this year, the four of us on screen, and even the fifth person who's behind screen, Matthew Kressel, and 20 of our closest and most favorite authors are going to be back here from December 10th to December 24th for the first annual New York Ghost Story Festival. So we will be reading our favorite ghost stories, both classic and contemporary, over about 7 or 8 nights in that 2-week period. We'll be bringing you that news. Hope you can join us. And it'll be a great reason to see these 3 authors again very soon, much sooner than later. So thank you to everyone for coming. I had a blast hanging out and hearing these great stories and sharing this time with everyone here.
Yeah, thank you so much to everyone who came, and to the 3 of you, and to Matt behind the scenes. This was really fun.
Yeah, thank you, Dan, for putting this all together and for your wonderful reading. I love that story. And it's been so much fun to be with you guys, Ina. It's always great to see you.
Always.
And all my students and friends and family who showed up. I'm glad you could make it to the reading.
Yeah, really. Thanks again, Dan. You're the host with the most, and all you guys. Ina, it's a beautiful, beautiful story, sweetheart.
Thank you, guys.
It's beautiful, and thank you everybody who came out tonight. We'll see you. We'll see you in December.
We'll see you soon. I guess this will conclude a strange and uncanny Halloween. Maybe we should. Maybe we're just going to end the broadcast, or we could run our intro or outro. Run our intro as an outro. But either way, this is the end of a strange and uncanny Halloween.
Bye.